Welcome back to the Football Fitness Federation podcast. This is episode 259. I'm so confused today. I'm joined by, is it my co-host? Is it guest? I can't work it out. Jordan Tyra is back.
Back for another episode or co-hosting of the own episode. I don't know how it works.
So we did have a few guests lined up this week. It's not quite gone to plan, but what we've decided to do is get Jordan on, and we're going to talk through. We've got a few topics we're going to talk about, and a lot of our conversations, they do spiral into something that turns into some sort of quality somewhere down the line, don't they? So let's just see how it goes.
Hope so. Yeah, hopefully.
Mate, how are things? How are things going down there? You've got the can we talk about the project?
Yeah, we can. Yeah, the Physical Performance Hub. Nearly there, nearly up and running, opening end of this month, end of October. So the Physical Performance Coach has been going since 2020, but along with a bit of a team. So some of my colleagues or previous colleagues from AFC Bournemouth and other people in the area who have been recommended and know, we've started basically a sort of private sports science and medicine department to try and help athletes. Because as we know, top level performance support, it's found in the top clubs, in the elite clubs. But if you're a semi-pro athlete or a non-professional athlete, or even a professional athlete that just hasn't got the resources at their club, they don't get that level of performance support. So we're there trying to bridge that gap. So we've got myself, two other S&C coaches, performance psychologists, and sports therapists as well. So basically, like I say, like I'm trying to give that kind of private sports science and medicine department that you'd find at a Premier League or top level club to clients in Southampton, Dorset, Bournemouth, Hampshire, all down here on the south coast basically. So it's looking exciting, really cool facility, brand new facility that's kind of getting set up as we speak. So it's keeping me busy, put it that way. Few more grey hairs suddenly starting to appear and a few more wrinkles on the forehead, but yeah, it's going to be a really exciting project when it all kicks off.
That's class. I'm excited to come down and visit when you get open. Just give an idea, because I know you've mentioned some of the areas there. Just tell people exactly where it is, Jordan, because if there's anyone listening that's in that area and they're wondering exactly where it is, go on, give the address.
It's called Three-Legged Cross area. It's like a little villagey town area, but it's Westcroft Business Park in Three-Legged Cross, just outside Wimborne, just kind of north of Bournemouth, just outside Ringwood, just off the A31, if anyone knows it down here. Really easy to get to, just pull off the motorway basically, and there you are. So it's going to be good. It's going to be good.
Awesome, mate. Well, I thought we'd start this with some reflections on last week, which the podcast has gone down pretty well, and I appreciate you coming on for your debut as co-host, which you got voted very highly, I've got to say. People are pretty kind to you. I was expecting a bit of backlash and complaints, but no, people were kind. But no, Sean Cumming was on in the previous episode, and obviously a lot of the things we spoke about, I actually had some private messages from people saying they loved the episode. It's something that they are trying or have tried to implement at the clubs. So I hope it gives people a bit of a resource or maybe something to reach out to give examples of how it actually works at clubs like I know you've experienced. I know, did you get any feedback on it?
Yeah, I had a few people, actually a few of my colleagues previous colleagues from Bournemouth, got in touch as well and said it was really, really down to earth and good. I think the best thing, I've seen Sean present a few times, and every time you come away with something, even if you think you're relatively clued up on, growth maturation testing, monitoring and tracking, as well as biobanding, I'm definitely no expert in it, but Sean is. So you hear him speak on the matter. That's why I was so keen to ask him his thoughts on the future, because it just sheds light on it. And I think that's like you said, people reach out because they want to shed more light on it. And I think that's the beauty of the podcast and kind of the whole reason, this company was started in the first place, to try and shed more light on important topics that affect, academy footballers and hopefully in the long run, first team footballers. So, I think as we touched on in the podcast, if you're at a club that, is trying to integrate it, like I know, you the messages about that, it's tough because, as we know, changing people's perceptions of what's already in place, certainly in the men's game, from my experience, the women's game's typically a little bit more open to change because it's a newer, more evolving setting. Whereas my experiences in the men's game have been, you have got to plug away at something before it starts to land. And I felt that in previous clubs, Cat 3 clubs, where again budgets are tight and it's just all about getting players through to the first team for academies, and it is the long-term kind of viewpoint on things isn't always there. So that can be a bit more of a challenge. And I think that's what people will face. People will face those challenges. Like I said in the podcast, though, just again, from my experience, if you can look at it and approach it from a player development point of view, rather than this is a cool glitz and glam sports science thing that, it's our own kind of rhetoric that we're trying to push, then you're always going to get pushback if you do it that way. But if you can come along and say, well, we can either keep players, we reckon we can keep players in the system if we can be a bit more patient, and we can challenge our, say, early maturers a bit better, which will improve their player development. And then you can go down all the other routes of, if we can track when players are growing fast, we're going to be better prepared at, dealing with any injuries that might crop up. Because if we know they're in, what we called red zone, or, their major growth spurt, adolescent growth spurt, that is, then, we know they're more susceptible to injury. So we can try and put interventions in place and try and monitor their loading and watch their loading. So it just makes more sense from that point of view. But again, it's how you tactfully do that, because if you've got to convince the big bosses, heads of academy, even if it's directors of sport, if it's whoever, to change processes, then it's always going to be a difficult thing to do. But again, Sean made it very, very clear the benefits of it, and you just need to look at the examples of other countries, like the Belgium example, and why European countries with a far smaller population than us, without the academy setup that we have in this country. And you think of the academy, sports scientists in this country and how many we have here versus how many might be in a country like Belgium or Sweden or Denmark, like he was mentioning, and you're thinking how something's not quite adding up there, like he was mentioning. So I think if it's a resource that you want to implement in your club, like Sean said, reach out to people like Sean, people like David Johnson, people like Ben Bradley, people like Des Ryan, people, at Arsenal, Southampton, Man United. Literally, I think Man United this week, I think you put the tweet out, didn't you, that Man United have just gone into a buy-abandon block this week. So, it is happening. It is happening. But in my opinion, too few and far between. So if you are one of those people who wants to bring it in, speak to those clubs which are doing it.
Yeah, I'd be interesting to, because obviously there's just so much stuff we took away from the episode last week, but I keep be keen to get maybe one of your main takeaways in a second, because I mentioned it on the end of the podcast that a couple of things really stood out for me from what Sean and yourself were saying. And one of them was, because I think a lot of it comes when coaches are fighting that battle to get something in place, you need a strong rationale, and you also need strong evidence of it working.
Yeah.
And all these clubs, like you've mentioned, you're kind of getting a bit of a portfolio together to say, look at Arsenal, look at this club, look at that club. These are all clubs that are having success in doing it. And I think that's only going to develop, isn't it? But a couple of the things that really stood out for me was the impact it has on both early and late maturers. Because I think sometimes with bio-banding, and this is me speaking who's not been in an academy for a number of years, but maybe some coaches are leaning towards, well, it's only really, we're only putting it in place for like the late maturers. But Sean underlined that, didn't he? And said, no, it's actually, and we talked about it, it's benefiting both, because these are facing this type of challenge and these are facing this type of challenge. So I thought that was a really interesting takeaway from it initially.
Yeah, and actually it goes further than that as well, because you're on time maturers. If you split the bands and you suddenly take all the higher percentage adult height, or what we class as maybe the early maturing players out of an age group or a cohort, and put them into their peers of biological age, then the on time maturers all of a sudden are going to stand out a bit more, because they're not competing with people who are physically more developed, and somebody who might be kind of middle of the pack suddenly becomes more towards the top of the pack. So it like you say, I think originally it was just, the conception was that it was, or the perception was all about, we're just looking after the late maturers because they, they're at a disadvantage in this, and that, the other. But actually, when you dig a little deeper and scratch beneath the surface, you find it's actually benefiting all the players in different ways. And the example I gave, it was clear as day. He was an under 13 player, and within his chronological age group, he was banging goals in for fun against bigger teams than Bournemouth as well. And you kind of thinking, blooming heck, this kid is something. Biologically, he was one of the most, if not the most mature in that age group, I think. And when he all of a sudden he came up against people bigger than him, physically and similar to him, it was a completely different challenge for him, and he thrived off it. He loved it. Some players didn't. It's not always going to be 100% across the board that every player loves it, because some players who might be absolutely bossing their age group because biologically they're miles ahead and matured than the rest of their age group, they might enjoy that success week in, week out, feeling like the main person on the pitch. All of a sudden you throw them into an environment where it's actually a bit more difficult, and they might go, well, I'm not scoring goals anymore, or I'm actually finding it harder. I'm getting tackled. I can't just run through an entire team and smash it past the keeper. So it comes down to, like Sean kept saying, it's the education side of it, and the workshops with parents and players. So we, like I said on the podcast, we sent out questionnaires, but also we sent out every single time we did a biobanding block. I did a growth and maturation presentation, and don't get me wrong, there was so much in place before I joined Bournemouth as well. Like DJ and Ben Bradley and previous, sports scientists have done all that sort of stuff as well. But just whilst I was there, we just refreshed it each time, kind of thing. And every single biobanding block, we sent out the growth and maturation webinar that we did with them, just to keep them refreshed. This is why, this is why, this is why. And it's just that dripping tap effect that eventually players did start to really kind of see the benefits and realize why we did it. There's always a couple. There's always the odd few that were like, no, I don't like this, not sure. Typically, when you actually spoke to them and found out a bit more and scratched beneath the surface, you found they were a bit more old school, stuck in their ways, and said, this isn't how it was done back in the day, or it wasn't done in my day like this. And it's just about evolving, in my opinion. Yeah. And that's the future of academy football. You've got to evolve. That we know that the levels of the Premier League and all the top leagues in Europe are improving every single season. Speeds, distances, everything like that just keep on getting higher. I don't know when that ceiling will be hit, if it ever will be, or if we continue to improve human performance. So if our academies aren't evolving, we're probably going to push through less and less players, and that's a problem. So for me, academy football's got to evolve, and as have perceptions on biobanding as well, like you say.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. We're going to talk about that a little bit, about sort of the future, where the game's going to go. Essentially, we're preparing for a different game now, aren't we? So when people have got that perspective of it's not how we did it, well, that's fine, but we're not really preparing for the same demands and game, even fixtures and all the sort of stresses that come at a first team level. It's not the same now.
No.
One of the other things that I mentioned on the podcast, and we talked about it within, and I think this could be disregarded, but I think it's so important, is that language. We spoke about playing up, playing down, playing across age groups. I think that when you start getting that into your language that you're using with players, with parents, that's really powerful, isn't it? Because you're suddenly getting, again, it's fighting. Nobody likes change, do they? Everyone is resistant to change to a certain point. So if you start trying to change the age group that a player is playing in, especially if they're going down an age group, like it can be seen in a certain way. Playing across age groups, when Sean mentioned that, I was like, actually, that's really powerful for parents. Came into my head first, to be honest.
Yeah.
Because the way they perceive that and see that could be very different.
Yeah, and it's something I've seen firsthand, because Bournemouth were doing that in terms of the language and trying to say play across. Certainly in the FP, under 9s to under 11s, even 12s, and potentially even 13s and 14s, because we know the effect of growth and maturation. It's just trying to change, like you say, the mindset. Players, again, the players who resisted biobanding, or the players who didn't enjoy it, were the ones who psychologically, again, thought they were playing down, or they thought they were being punished by playing down, in inverted commas. And it was, again, trying to explain to them, no, we're matching you with who, is more similar to you right now. So you're not playing down, you're just playing with people who are more similar to you, playing across the age groups, like Sean was saying. And I think, there's the famous Dutch model where they don't really put players in positions. There's even I think it's Man United and Chelsea. I think Man United speak about it, didn't they? When they just said they just basically played street football, as an arrival activity, and it was just like all the age groups, kind of in the youngest academy age groups, were just mixed in. And unfortunately, that is the reality. When you go to open age football and you come into the men's game, it doesn't matter what age you are, you've got to be physically ready. So you might have a slightly later underdeveloped, under 21, who's technically outstanding, playing with, a 32-year-old pro who is solid as a rock at the back in a big unit, and they've got to try and compete. So it is one of those things where if you can just get players from as early as on to kind of be happy with moving across age groups, it's really important. And the players buy into it. The parents is the big one, like you say. Parents can throw the toys at pram sometimes, which is quite annoying. But if you start with the FP, it's so easy. And the best way is training nights. Just not, even when you're not bi-banded, even if you're just doing normal training, it's just 9s and 10s mixed in. Everyone's just playing around, and you can throw the 11s in there. And it just becomes so fluid that the actual structure of it, you almost forget about it sometimes. And you look over the pitch, and it's like, oh, the 9s and 10s are down there. I couldn't tell you which age group is from a glance. And I think that's a better training environment, in my opinion, than right, under 9s you're over there, under 10s you're over there, under 11s you're over there. And you'd never mix in. So language and just the perception is a big thing.
I think when you were saying that then as well about like people getting their backs up on seeing it as a punishment, essentially, like playing down, I think it just reminded me of how some players would treat physical work away, like off pitch, like in the gym.
Yeah,
it's definitely something I experienced a fair few years ago, like when you get players in the gym, because you knew that they needed to work on whatever it was. Sometimes that would be seen as a punishment or being taken away from the team environment. Whereas now, I think with the education and everything and the experiences that players have had, they understand and they probably chase it more than anything now, don't they? That they want to do this work. And I think it'll probably go in the same sort of direction as that players will start to accept it a lot more when there's more examples of more clubs and coaches using it.
Yeah, definitely. I think the biggest step we'll see is when clubs can kind of fully buy into it and value it. And some clubs do this, where they'll say, rather than having, a full training session as with the rest of the squad, we'll take you out for extra time to work physically, if it's in the gym or if it's on the pitch. Say somebody is going through adolescent awkwardness and rapid growth, and the limbs are all over the place. They keep kicking the floor before they kick the ball and all that sort of stuff. The classic signs of adolescent awkwardness. We're going to take 20 minutes of your technical session, and we're just going to do like lots of proprioception work, just trying to retrain your body, like the length of its limbs, and just try and help you. That's when you're going into a whole uncharted territory of like, this is pure individualized development now. I think the difficulty is there's within football clubs, as we all know, there are departments pulling for their own priorities. Sports science and medicine and the S&C and physical performance department are always going to be trying to get more time to work with players, but the technical coaches will always want more time to do extras or technical work and tactical work, and performance analysis might even want, we want to do sit down classroom sessions. So balancing the time is really difficult, and it's how you challenge players, but at the same time how you can challenge your coaches and your cohort around you to say, I know he needs a bit more tactical work, but right now this is what's going on with him, and actually he could prioritize some gym work. If it is to, if it is somebody going through adolescent awkwardness to try and retrain the body and the mind, if it is somebody who's kind of through the growth spurt, and technically outstanding and kind of playing up an age group, let's call it that for now, but physically they need to try and put some mass on, or try and increase their size and strength, power, etc., to match the age groups they might be playing with, so that they actually have a fair chance. Because as we've seen that, I've seen that many times with the good early maturers who, when they're kind of, let's say, ballpark figure 11, 12, 13 years old, they'll play up because it's a classic case of physically they're ready to play up an age group. They're ready to play up an age group because they're early maturers. Then players just start to catch them up, and then when they go back to playing in their normal chronological age group, again, it's that case of some coaches say, oh, well, he's not playing up anymore, is he? So he's not doing as well. Or the parents going, why isn't he playing up anymore? Or, even the players starting to think, well, why am I back with my actual age group? And it's then the balance of the clubs for A, the language, but B, how you're going to train those players and try and either keep them pushing on, or do you just take a bit of time out from one aspect and put another aspect in terms of their training and how their training week looks? But that will be the real future for me in terms of academy, when people's weeks look completely different. And there are some clubs doing this already, by the way. So as far as I'm aware, when it's not just right, you've got one squad, out you go to training, or you go into the gym, and then you go this way, and it might look completely different for 3 or 4 individuals in that squad. That's how I think it should be, personally.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know if you've seen it, but I was literally on Twitter this morning,
Sorry,
and there was, I think it's in the States, there was I want to say 13, but it might be 14-year-old making a first team appearance. And I don't know any other context to that. I literally saw the video of them getting substituted on. But it's interesting, isn't it? Like, is that part of a long-term plan? Has this sort of stuff been considered within that? Or are they just super talented and they need him in that environment to help the team? You just don't know, do you? And I don't know any context to it. But no, it was interesting to see. What was your big takeaways? Because obviously this is an area that you've worked with a lot recently with the role at Bournemouth, and I know you've come across Sean before. You've had conversations and all the rest of it. So I'm intrigued to hear what you took away from it.
I think my biggest takeaway is just how level-headed he is with this, because I'm really passionate about it, and I was trying to probe and be like, what do you think the future is? What do you think clubs need to do? And I kind of wanted him to go, every club needs to be doing this. It needs to be the Premier League when it comes to EPPP and category status and audits and stuff. Every club should have some sort of buyer banding within their system and within their program. But he was level-headed and rational enough to say, don't force it upon the clubs if they don't want to do it, which is completely right if you actually think about it. But he's just got a lot of knowledge on this topic, and I think if more people can tap into that, it will get out there in terms of the benefits of it. But also when he was talking about other sports and how they're not uptaking this, certainly when you think about rugby. I mean, rugby, I know they're doing weight classes, but this just makes so much sense for rugby, doesn't it? And and you could see a little bit of frustration, and maybe when he was saying, surely this is going to be taken up in rugby, it makes more sense to be in that sport, really. So I think there's so much to take away from it. But if we can hopefully get the word out, I mean, there's a lot of clubs already doing some excellent work, like I keep mentioning. But it might take some sort of countrywide, club-wide education pathway for sports scientists or even coaches. And I know that Sean does speak on some of the coaching qualifications and things like this, but he's still met with resistance, and some coaches who have never really come across it before. And I've been met with resistance by coaches who have never come across this before. And that just comes down to education and actually seeing this all in action. So that was my biggest takeaway, really, is that as he was very, very kind of complimentary of how the Premier League and practitioners in this country are really trying to push this, and we're really starting to be at the forefront of this. But at the same time, there's still a long way to go. So yeah, it's a really interesting topic. I could speak for hours on it, as you know, but I think the people who do this really well, that there's a reason why those clubs do well in terms of their academies, and their academy players are in the system. I'm really fortunate that my first taste of academy football was at Southampton, and that's when I landed my first placement year. And they had brilliant high-profile examples of this, like James Ward-Prowse and Oxlade-Chamberlain, and Theo Walcott, and many of the players that played down. So straight away, my first experience of academy football was an academy that did this, kind of, individualized on growth and maturation before it was kind of really popular. And you kind of thinking, right, okay, because you're a young student, you take that on board and you kind of run with it, and that becomes your mantra as you go throughout your career. So when I was asking Sean about what do you think needs to be done for students coming into the game, graduates of sports science or S&C degrees coming into the professional world of sports science and strength and conditioning, how can we, is there a way we can upskill them? And, when he was talking about actually there's not that many unis doing it and speaking about it very well, that was another big takeaway where I'm thinking could be a problem there, or it could be something that we could try and address. How we do that, that's not up to me. I'm not sure, but I think it relies on the practitioners at the end of the day, and hungry practitioners who want to improve and try and develop their game and their knowledge, and then what they can bring to the players they're working with. And heads of departments for academy performance, head of academy sports science and medicine, head of performance, whatever it might be, at a club, being open enough, if they're not already doing it, to go, let's give this a go and see if it helps our players develop and keep more players in the academy, and hopefully, get more academy players into the first team and have more academy graduates. So, a long way to go, like Sean said, in terms of Biobanding, I think.
I'm intrigued to get your thoughts on this, because the other bits of feedback that we got from coaches was coaches working in the women's game, and how this could be massively beneficial for the women's game. You just mentioned some of one of your previous experiences at Southampton there, but another one of yours was at Liverpool ladies. Obviously it's been a little bit of time since you were at the club, but your experience in the female game, how do you think this would be accepted? Like, is there any sort of change that you'd feel like needed to be made from what you would do at a club like Bournemouth or some of the other clubs that you've mentioned, or would it just be working the same way? Like, what's your thoughts on that?
I think the biggest thing is the logistics of it. And I don't think it's changed yet, but certainly when I was there and at Blackburn ladies before then, they were dual age bands. So rather than being 9s, 10s, 11s, 12s, it was 10s, 12s, 14s, 16s. So if you now all of a sudden think about the impact of growth and maturation, in chronological ages, 11s, 12s, 13s, 14s, now double that and go 10s, 12s, 14s, 16s, you're just increasing the range of difference between young girls in the sport. And we know a lot of people, Cy Brundish is very hot on this topic in terms of strength training for young girls, because they're going through a lot of changes, and they're getting put under forces and into competitions when they might be playing, biologically, age groups above them, if it is that dual age band. So there's a logistical change, I think, that could be useful. The problem with it might be that the uptake and enough clubs around the country might not quite have enough players to form regular games programs, regular squad sizes for each of the age groups. I like to think we're getting bigger now, and the uptake is much more there. I mean, you see there are more women's teams associated with the men's team. They are directly part and parcel of it than ever before. That's changed in just the space like since I've left the women's game. And when we did our network meeting up at Manchester Institute Performance as well, and we had brilliant presenters there, some of the work going on with the FA in terms of tracking all of the academy players in WSL and Women's Championship, in terms of all their data and performance data from GPS, etc. That's huge. That is huge. And you think about, if you put that into the men's game, context, that is literally like the FA tracking every single Premier League academy and Championship academy, maybe even League One academy, and all the players and all their data, and then you could just pick from that, and that would be massive. But obviously in the men's game, FA, like Sean said on the podcast, FA is different to the Premier League, which is and the clubs are their own right. So the logistics of the women's game are still slightly different in terms of the academy setup. But I remember I was trying to track it. Now, on reflection, you look back then, we're talking 7 years ago, I wasn't using as accurate measurements or ways of recording it as we were now, as people would be now, in terms of the equations were the maturity offset method, and it wasn't percentage of height and things like that. So the science has moved on, but if there's any, like Sean said, if there's any cohort of players that need growth maturation, it certainly is women's game because of that dual age band thing. And if I'm wrong on that, apologies. If people are in the women's academy setup and they go, no, we've gone from dual academy, we're back to single age groups now, then brilliant. Please tell me otherwise. But that was certainly something I found, because certainly in the under 14s age group, you could literally have, such weight variance. The weight was the big one. You could have somebody who was real early maturer. They could have 30, 40 kilos on, somebody in the same squad training against them every day, every week kind of thing. So that's a problem, as we know, in any walk of life. So then you've got lack of training, lack of strength through the growth spurt and stuff to add on top of that, and it's a bit of a recipe for disaster. So hopefully that gets addressed the sooner rather than later. Yeah,
I think logistics and even down to facilities and stuff. I know it's something that Si's brought up a lot, isn't it? That's a massive issue that's going to have a knock-on effect to a lot of different aspects of a program. But I think you're right. Like, that's, if you start thinking about different training nights and the fact they can't even get a pitch anyway, or getting kicked off pitches, that just shouldn't be happening. So that needs to be addressed first, doesn't it? And I'm sure there's clubs that aren't in that position, which is good, and everyone should be the same. But the clubs that are facing that, it's going to be a massive battle, isn't it, to try and put something like that in place on top of all those sort of issues that they're facing.
Yeah, even at the time I was at Liverpool, I saw a big change. We were training at a local college from the under 16s down to the under 10s that had a college gym. Now it was not a performance gym. It had more cardio equipment than anything else. It was difficult to try and get any sort of proper structured resistance training done in there, but you had to kind of come up with ways of doing it, which is really good for practitioners and a good development tool for us. But selfishly, that's not what we want. We want the players to get the best development possible. And then even while I was there, the academy girls then moved across to Kirkby in the boys academy, and the difference literally overnight. We were training on the indoor at the academy with a gym next door to it, literally in the same indoor building, and you could just see straight away, like, here we go. Now we're talking. Now we can get some real work done. So that facilities thing is still a big issue. It really is, and because it's probably a case of clubs for the younger age groups have just got to try and book a 3G anywhere in the rough local area. They're not considering, actually we could do with a gym on site, or we could do with some way of getting some sort of resistance work done into the girls. Whereas, let's face it, Cat 1, Cat 2 boys academies and Cat 3, typically they'll have access to all of that on a training night. So there's still a long way to go. It's come a long way, but there's still a long way to go.
Yeah, I think it's all going to be boosted by the foundations of the women's game, isn't it? Like, through from grassroots right the way through to the top. That all needs the support, and whether that's financially, whether that's facilities, for this sort of work to take effect. And also that will then show at first team level as well. At the games, like you've mentioned, the games come on so much in the last few seasons that the next progression needs the support, doesn't it, from the ground up?
Yeah, definitely. You look at the WSL, just kicked off this weekend. You've got teams playing in the stadiums properly, and it's been coming in the last couple of seasons, but it seems to be every few weeks now, whereas before it was quite rare that it was the women's first team playing in the actual club stadium. Now it is quite regular. You had Arsenal playing at the Emirates against Liverpool ladies, and Liverpool pulled off a shock result 1-0 win. And you watch the game, you watch the highlights and stuff, and the stadium's pretty full. And you're going, wow. I don't think that would have happened. Certainly when I was still in the women's game, and you go back certainly 10 years, and that wouldn't happen. So it's growing, and it's continually growing, which is amazing, and it just needs more people to adopt it. And that's why I always say working in the women's game is so exciting. Certainly right now it must be amazing because of these growing aspects of it. And like I touched on earlier, actually when you try and implement something new, I always found it was so easy to do. So I want to try something new, or might want to try and tweak some of our tests that we do, even something like that, or can I add something into the warm-up? Whereas quite often in men's games, that might come with a bit of resistance if you try and tell that to a coach. No, why are you doing that? No, we always do this before or whatever it might be. But in the women's game, I always found it was actually quite a really nice environment to work in, because it was like, yeah, if you think it's going to work, if you think it's going to benefit the players, just explain your rationale. Yeah, that sounds good. Cool, let's go for it. And you're like, oh wow, this is amazing. So now with the game growing like it is, I would recommend practitioners, go there. I know people that have. Jacob Staines gone from Exeter down here, and we were always playing each other and bumping into him. I've known him for a long time, and he's now with the Man City first team as a physical performance coach with them. So, and he's done really well from all the looks of it. So, it's happening more and more, and hopefully long may that continue.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great message. There's a number of practitioners as well. Paudie's obviously gone over to the women's team with Arsenal. So the more quality coaches that get involved in those programs, the better. So 100%. We are a few days away now from the Training Ground Guru Conference, which we're both going to be at. I'm very fortunate enough to have been asked to host a discussion with Tony Strudwick, Tom Little, and Dave Carolan. And we're going to be talking about developing the football athlete of the future. So we're going to get our crystal balls out and work out what's going to be going on in the next few years. Well, I thought it'd just be a nice way to wrap the podcast up, really, and just open this bit of a topic up for your thoughts. We've talked a lot on the podcast, and I was thinking about this morning as well. There's obviously the episode we did with Damien Harper and Gareth Sanford, where we were talking about the demands on the players, the increase in D-cells. There's a lot of talk about how the game has come on the last few years. To then look ahead, I was actually speaking to Dave about this the other day on a call, not on a podcast or anything, and it becomes a bit of a crystal ball because you don't really know what we're preparing for. But as always, as practitioners, you've got to be very adaptable. You've got to be prepared for the unknown, really. But I think the fact is how physical the game's got, and we've said developing the football athlete. These are serious athletes now, both on the men's and the female side. It's only going to keep increasing, in my opinion. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, 100%. And we asked this at the R4P network meeting, didn't we? Because one of the networking tasks was how have the rule changes in terms of the added time, being more strict on time wasting. How's that changed things? So something like that could crop along. And all of a sudden a significant rule change might all of a sudden add 10 minutes onto the end of your game. And when you were speaking earlier about, and people might say, oh, back in my day it wasn't like this and this, that, the other. But back in your day, you probably didn't have 14 minutes of added time at the end of the game. You had 3 or 2, and that is significant. You look at, this is what's beautiful about the data that's involved, GPS numbers, all that sort of stuff now, because you can literally look down to most intense minutes. You can look down to, the performance drop off in certain, 5-minute intervals and all that stuff. And we know at the end of games, the end of halves, significant performance drop offs happen because fatigue and things kick in. So if you're now suddenly, we've gone from forever trying to train a 90 plus 3 plus 4 athlete, minute athlete, to now all of a sudden 90 plus 14, 15. That's a significant knock on. So, you've got things like that might just crop up. We've also got to look at VAR. Now, as a Liverpool fan, I don't really like VAR at the minute. But the significant don't use that. But you've got things like that actually there's going to be significant breaks and things in games that there weren't really before. And all this sort of thing going on. So we just don't know sometimes, which is what it is. But I like to think that certainly in academies, the mindset of we're trying to almost over prepare players to make we always talk about the jump as you go up the age groups, up from 18s to 21s, 21s to first team. You've got to have that mindset of you've got to be ready to step up. If you're like, oh, they're doing well for an 18, that's great, but they've actually got to train, and prepare to be an under 21 or an under 23 or a first team player, etc. So You almost got to try and have that mindset, I think, to try and train for the future. And the other thing that people always seem to forget is that systems change. Back in 15, 20 years ago, 4-4-2 standard, and then it all comes around in cycles, and how the game is played changes around the world. Pep unfortunately has changed how Premier League teams are trying to play. And even Jurgen Klopp in his time at Liverpool has changed how Liverpool changed. It used to be heavy metal pressing, all that sort of stuff, and that's changed again. So if that's going on in clubs, and we know clubs are hiring and firing managers all the time, if you've got a manager that comes in and says, right, throughout the academy, I want you to play this system this way, pressing this way, into out, all that sort of detail, and then 6 months later that gaffer's gone and a new gaffer comes in and they change something else, you're never getting a clear message for the players and the direction of academies. So you're just constantly weaving from one to the other. So how do you prepare athletes that way? So it is a minefield. It is difficult. But I think methods and techniques and things like biobanding and being hot on, being patient with players if they need a bit of extra development time, and looking at the bigger picture, that will help. Because you might have somebody, like we said last week on the podcast, you might have somebody who isn't technically right now, might be ready, might be good enough to handle the jump up, but physically might not be, even mentally might not be able to handle that jump up. So we've got to be patient. But unfortunately, clubs struggle with patience, in my opinion. They do, because there's pressure on people's jobs at the end of the day. If the academy isn't getting enough graduates through, people start to question the academy, and that's what happens. But you might be unlucky. You might have a crop of either not that talented athletes. You might have teams drop out leagues and lose funding and then have to come back up. So then they might lose a good crop of players to rival clubs. And then there's all these factors that come into it. So yeah, it's very hard to predict. Very, very hard indeed. But I think the one given is that the physicality levels are always going to increase, because our knowledge as scientists is getting deeper. I go back 50. I think back to when I first started at uni. I'd never heard of a Nordic. But now every club has some form of Nordic principle for their strengthening hammies in there. So the training modalities of training, so we're only increasing the athleticism of the athletes, and that is exactly what they are. But my biggest advice to any young practitioners just come into academies is just always remember the ideal footballer is an outstanding all-rounded athlete who's also a very good footballer. And for me, if that mindset never changes, you will be at least able to adapt to what changes in football. That's just my view anyway. That's just a little ramble for you there. But
no, I think they're great points. I think the rule change is something that it's going to happen, isn't it? We're going to get something over the next few years, whether we agree or disagree with it. We'll probably disagree. But I mean, when I was thinking about it this morning, I was like, so if the intensity of the game just keeps going up and up and up, and we just keep getting this rise like we have the last few years, how does that impact players? We can get players to a certain fitness level. Does that mean, because you mentioned there about the changes from a few years ago, I actually saw a team sheet again on X. I think it might have been yesterday, from a few years ago, and it was 3 substitutes. Now you're talking 7. Yeah. So straight away, that's a big change, isn't it? You've got a squad size increase. So does it mean at some point that we can use more players within a game? So players will maybe play less minutes. You'll have more of a rotation of more players being involved, which means the intensity could potentially stay higher for longer. James Redden recently on the podcast kept referring to games as like basketball games because it was just end to end. Are we just going to try and create something like that in a lot of games, which involves just using different players and keeping players fresh? These are the sort of conversations, aren't they? These are things we don't know, but these are things that could potentially happen with that increase.
Yeah, and I think as well that even with that, there's challenges, because what will happen is they go, all right, more fixtures. Who knows? They'll probably try and invent another tournament soon that every team has to be part of. Because that seems to come up. They'll try and squeeze more fixtures in. I think for me, the really frustrating thing is that games just seem to be really random now. They just seem to be spreading out more. Like it used to be. Again, you go back, it used to be Saturday, used to be Premier League Day. They might have done a Super Sunday. Occasionally they'd have a Monday. they'd never have a Thursday night Premier League game, very rarely. But now it just seems to be, you actually forget. I mean, I haven't done fantasy Premier League for a while, but I'd never be able to keep on top of it nowadays because you just constantly, oh no, like, there's a game tonight I completely forgot about. So there's fixtures everywhere, and then you add in all the cup competitions. So they're going, oh, it's fine. We're going to, the Premier League, the EFL, etc. Are going to say, oh, it's fine. You're allowed 5 substitutes now, 7 substitutes. That's great, but if you've not got the squad depth, that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And if at the end of the day, yeah, you might be allowed 7 substitutes, but I don't know about you. If I'm the gaffer and my job's on the line, I'm probably going to try and put on my best players as much as possible. So I could roll on, basically, keep rolling on these subs. But if he's the game, if he's my game winner, she's my game winner, I'm trying to keep them on the pitch as much as possible. So, there's always kind of ways which is going to fall down a little bit. So, if it does keep developing the physicality time, and then they keep squeezing these fixture congestions. And I know everyone loves to hate on Jurgen Klopp for moaning about things and fixture congestion, but he's right. He's got a point. That teams are traveling further afield now for more European Cup competitions. We've got an extra, the Europa Conference League as well. So teams are traveling further afield that never would have done. And we know about the impact of travel. We look at the VAR controversy and the officials were in UAE 48 hours before they're then doing a Premier League game. So if it's happening to officials, now imagine the athletes who've got to run around and try and perform at the best of their ability. So it needs to come. It just needs sensible thinking, I think. And unfortunately, it comes down to one thing, I think, and it's money and it's TV rights and it's sponsorship deals and it's more competitions equals more money and things like that. And UEFA get involved with the Europa competitions and stuff like that. So that's what it's going to boil down to, and we're just going to get to a point where players are breaking down because of fixture congestion. Teams are suffering because their best players are getting injured because they're having to fulfill these fixtures all throughout the leagues, and it just needs to come to a point where we go, this is too much now. The human body can only go so far, as good as it's getting every year, and we're developing the science, we're developing our strength and conditioning habits and behaviors. But at the end of the day, there is going to be a ceiling at some point, and hopefully we don't hit that soon, but it could happen. You never know.
I don't want to stamp all over, especially what I know Dave's going to mention at the conference. But one thing he brought up the other day when we were on the phone was actually the type of player that we have been trying to prepare, and especially in terms of like talent ID, scouting. How many scouts have been out there trying to find a Bernardo Silva or these little technical players that are flooded throughout the Premier League now, that are winning World Cups? And have we been trying to prepare like those type of players, or have we been going in a different direction? Because I'd argue a lot of people have probably been going in a different direction. We might take the 1% like a Ronaldo, but he is literally a 1%. He's an outlier. But you look at the types of players now that are everywhere, that are dominating games, it's probably quite different to what we actually had in mind, especially a few years ago. So I think that's another really interesting thing, isn't it, on the sort of players that are going to be involved. Say in 10 years' time, what is the actual team going to look like in terms of the physical build, and how that then impacts the work we do in the gym, the support we give physically. It's an interesting one.
Yeah, definitely, and that goes right down to the academies. The scouts all over academy football. You go to another 14 game and you've got a bunch of scouts that stood on the corner watching all the players. So again, that could have a knock-on impact. If you've got a big recruitment drive, that you've got an academy manager, saying we want this type of player. This is our academy player. This is the build that we want pace and power, that sort of thing. And then in 4 years' time, actually we want really technical players, but you've just spent 4 years recruiting an entire academy worth of pace and power, and you've got no technical players. So it's a difficult one to bridge. And if you think it doesn't really happen in academies like that, it does. I can tell you that. I've been at clubs where it says we don't want that sort of player, and it does impact it. And then the long-term knock-on effect is you will get to probably an age group in the professional development phase where they'll try and step up, and they just won't make the grade, either technically or physically or whatever it might be. So the recruitment side of things is nuts. When you see what clubs are doing in terms of data now and where they're sending their scouts to try and find players, it is a bit mental. And when you think of how large an umbrella this industry has, and where it covers and how far afield it goes.
You've had a little insight there into the weekly conversations between Jordan and I. So I hope you've enjoyed that, because that sort of hour there has flown by. And we might do a few more of these with just the two of us. So let us know what you think of it. Hopefully we've covered some topics that have got you thinking about a few different things. Nice reflection on Sean's episode from last week as well. And like I said, last week, Jordan will be joining me on a few podcasts coming up with a few guests over the next few weeks as well. So Jordan, just give your info, mate. If anyone got any questions, especially for the Physical Performance Hub, like where are people going to go to keep up with that?
Yeah, Twitter and Instagram or X and Instagram are the easy ones. So again,
if you just say Twitter.
Can we just stick to Twitter? Yeah, it's easy, isn't it? But yeah, I'm myself, I'm Jordan Tyra 92 on Twitter, and then I've got the Physical Performance Hub and the Physical Performance Coach. If you just type those in, you'll find me basically, and it's very similar on Instagram. So I'll try to keep it quite concise, really, and quite easy to do. No numbers and things involved. So yeah.
Brilliant. And if anyone's at the Training Ground Guru Conference next week, 9th and 10th, I think it is, of October, come and say hi, because we will be there, especially on the Tuesday. And yeah, thanks for coming on, Jordan.
No worries. I will see you very soon.